Welcome to our fifth webinar, which is co-hosted by Quilter Cheviot, Brian Jacobson and Moore Kingston Smith. The topic under consideration today is fundraising and sustainability. How can charities become more resilient organisations post-pandemic? By way of introduction, my name is Charles Mosquito. I'm a charities director at Quilter Cheviot. I'm also a trustee of RL Glasspool, BAL Research UK and Prism the Gift Fund. I will be moderating this session. I am joined by my expert panelists. If I'll start off with Anita Bala, who is Chair of Trustees for the Birmingham Town Hall and Symphony Hall, independent member and Vice Chair of University of Warwick, Director of Local Enterprises Partnerships in Greater Birmingham and Solihull, a Governor of the Royal Shakespeare Company, and Anita has a long and distinguished career in media, and in 2009 was awarded an OBE for services to broadcasting and communities. We also have a regular panelist of Catherine Ross-Jomshi, a doyen of the charity legal profession. Catherine is a partner of Brown Jacobson, but she's also a trustee of Yorkshire Cancer Research and a trustee of the Brown Jacobson Charitable Trust, which is a grant-making charity. And then we have Robin Thomas, who has over 20 years experience as a professional fundraiser, has a strong track record in delivering large and challenging projects ranging from healthcare to education to the arts. Robin comes with an international background, having worked in North America, in Europe, Middle East, Australia, South Africa, as well as obviously the UK. Robin has a passion for music and is a trustee of the Royal College of Church Music. And then last but certainly not least, we've got Dan Fletcher, Director of Fundraising at Moore Kingston Smith. Like Robin, has a wealth of experience in fundraising with a wide range of organisations, both as a consultant and as a practitioner. However, he started in a very unusual route, I think, in the respect that he started out as a food scientist at Nestle, building on his degree in molecular biology and biochemistry. No doubt Dan will tell us how the switch to the charity sector came about. But Dan has worked for 11 years leading different fundraising teams before moving into advising charities in 2011. Dan is also a trustee of three charities: Rethink Mental Illness, Hertfordshire Natural History Society, where he is the treasurer, and Sustainable St Albans, which is a bit of a tongue twister. Anyway, before we get started, I thought I'd just set the scene. There is no doubt about it that the last 20 years we've seen a massive transformation in both the professionalisation and the expansion of the charity sector, and fundraising certainly has been at the forefront of that transformation. It's very easy to forget just how fortunate we are in the UK to have such a vibrant cross-section of organisations doing amazing work from grassroots onto the international stage. To put that into perspective, according to the Charity Commission, 2018-19, the sector's annual turnover was 75 billion. So that's twice what we spend on defence and half what we spend on the NHS. However, the pandemic has certainly been has created a perfect storm where organisations' abilities to generate funds have been significantly curtailed at a time when demand for their services has rocketed. And you only have to take, I know it's a little bit out of date, but NCVO's estimated that charities in the first 12 weeks of the crisis stood to lose an estimated about 4 billion. And that, in their mind, was a conservative estimate. So the sector's been tested on all levels. You know, we are unfortunately seeing organisations having their activities being curtailed or being forced to be curtailed, and in some cases closed, and obviously a number of job losses. However, I think in this session, what I'd like to do is to focus on the opportunities that are presenting themselves both during the pandemic and probably more importantly, in the respect we want to look forward, is post-pandemic. So with that in mind, Robin, perhaps if I could start with you, what, from your experience, is happening in the marketplace, and how have charities reacted to the pandemic?
Thanks, Charles. So I'm chief executive of a fundraising consultancy and fundraising project management company, Morgan Thomas Limited. So what we're seeing is based on work with our clients and then generally in the sector. We saw initially, and to a degree it's still there, a fair amount of retrenchment and cutting of fundraising investment. I find that quite understandable, but it's not always clear that the cuts were in the right place. And it's had this multiplier effect where in order to save money, some charities have cut their resources in generating money. After all, if fundraising is working properly, it's an investment center, not a cost center. But on the other hand, Charles, we are seeing charities really being quite canny in this, rebalancing their fundraising activity portfolios, deploying more resources to stewarding existing donors, retaining them, upgrading them, even if that is at the expense of cutting resources for direct marketing events and other high volume, low value fundraising activities, even corporate fundraising for that matter, all of which are proving to be difficult to make effective at the moment. To a degree, this has always been an issue, that of donor retention. A recent American study showed that.
Sadly, I think we've lost Robin temporarily. So I might turn to you, Dan, if I may.
Yeah.
Sure. And ask you what your experience has been.
Well, it's like Robin has been saying, it's been a real mix, Charles. There have been good things and bad things. I think as an example at Rethink Mental Illness, where I'm a trustee, the pandemic has sort of resulted in significant shifts in budget planning to start off with, which then has a knock-on impact on fundraising. But some of that budget planning has also been tied to opening up of new opportunities to deliver new services as a result of the pandemic, and also to collaborate in new ways with different organisations as well. So those are positive signs which have also resulted in new funding being available and a healthy dialogue with trust funders and corporate partners. And that a healthy dialogue, I think, is a really positive sign through the pandemic in terms of charities and funders working together to create a common good and to recognise the issues and challenges that each are facing. We've also seen some of our clients have been involved in delivering emergency appeals. That's been a shift in their approach to what they've done previously, and they've found success in that. Those emergency appeals can only last for so long, but there has been quite a lot of activity in that area, and particularly surprising sort of responses from individuals and also from the corporate sector in some elements of the charities that we've been working with, where they didn't expect businesses to be interested to get behind them, but at a local level, at a community level, some quite large businesses wanted to be seen to be injecting cash into certain areas, particularly parts of Birmingham actually, which were affected by the pandemic, and that's a real positive outcome as well.
Anita, is that been your experience as sort of chair of trustees of a number of, or involved with a number of organisations?
I mean, we've certainly felt the freeze, and that goes without saying. So that's the negative. But I think what it's done is given us an opportunity to sit back a little as trustees and think, well, how do we engage differently? It's been very heartening, as Dan has said, because in the events world, you know, for arts, culture performances going on, or would have been going on, and people have bought tickets for those. And what's been heartening is that individuals have chosen to leave the money with the charitable organisations, which is very heartening. And through that, I think that's a way of finding new supporters for the future. So I think it's been good. We're not out of the woods by any means. Sorry, got a frog in my throat all of a sudden. But what we've had to do as trustees is to find new ways of working, because there's no way we can carry on as it was, you know, pre-March. And I think that's really made us as trustees sit down and focus and say, well, where are the new opportunities? How do we grab those new opportunities? But there is some goodwill out there. We need to find that goodwill and optimize it.
And I'll come back to you on some of those points. But Catherine, from your experience, can you give examples of where charities have been successful in adapting?
Sure. I mean, I think one of the main changes, Charles, has been many charities refocusing on what their core activity is, or rather what it should be. So I think recentering around their charitable objects, maybe evaluating, have we overstretched ourselves? Are we delivering a lot of additional services that maybe that's not our sweet spot? Those are not the things that we should be doing as a charity. Maybe we should be focusing on where we can have the greatest outcome, the best service that can be delivered for those charitable beneficiaries. And I think perhaps it's a case of streamlining and not spreading themselves so thinly to say, actually, let's get back to our absolute core. What's at our root? What do we want to be known for, rather than trying to be known for everything? I think really focusing on what their key services are and what their key offering is. And I think for those charities that have maybe cut out some of that background noise and just sort of focused more on, this is what we want to be known for and this is what we're going to do going forward.
Yeah, no, I think that's interesting. And Anita, with your trustee hat on, what are the sort of risks and contingencies trustees should be asking or thinking about?
I think it's looking at Catherine's point about how do we keep our donors engaged and going back to our core, and I think that is really important. A few weeks ago we had a meeting with some of our big individual givers who've supported us for a very big capital project that is at the moment on time, only 3 weeks behind throughout this whole period. And it was really important to explain to them that we are focusing down. We're not asking them to support us in every nook and cranny that we might have asked for, but we're asking around specific ask and going back to our charitable purpose. And I think that rings very well with those individuals that we engaged with, and they want to know what's going on. I think what particularly individual givers don't want us to forget that they're there. They want to know what's going on. So when we showed them photographs, for example, of the capital project, that resulted in several checks arriving the next day. So I think we mustn't forget, there was a laziness in the past where we've thought about stakeholders and givers as, oh, we only have to give them a glass of warm white wine and they'll trump up with the funds. I think we've got to be a lot more sophisticated. And I think one way of getting sophisticated is going back to our core.
And actually, I mean, I think that leads on to Robin. Welcome back. Sorry that we lost you for temporarily, but Robin, your experience with big private donors, you know, have their attitudes changed? And if so, do you think that is a trend that will continue?
With big private donors, yes, we are seeing a change. I think specifically that change is being very interested in, probably for the first time, where one can be having a very grown-up and robust conversation about sustainability and resilience. We are finding that major donors, in fact, all individual donors across the board, there's never been a better time to be having discussions about endowment, reserves, building resilience for the mission of the charity that they care about. As I said, there's never been a better time to have that conversation. I do want to stress that having those conversations about was protecting their investment, wanting to make sure that if something like this ever happens again, the charities are well taken care of. That's only going to work with those charities that are doing a very good job of looking after their donors in the here and now, treating them as investors, as serious business partners, not transactional customers.
Yeah. Sorry, Anita, did you have something you wanted to say?
Well, just to say that many of our charities are going to be so important to the recovery, our economic recovery in our towns and cities. And think about arts and culture and the impact that will have on tourism, on generating income. So we must urge givers and government not to think about this sector, the charitable sector, as a sort of a nice to have when we're ready. It's going to be crucial to our recovery. So if it's going to be crucial, if the sector is crucial, then we've got to treat them seriously. So we would not expect businesses to have a little bit of money here and a little bit of money there. We would expect businesses to have a strategy for growth. We would expect businesses you know, for example, with furlough, to have a plan, a development plan and an exit plan. And we've got to, and government has got to make sure the charitable sector is seen in that light and not as a relative that we think about at the end of the line.
I think also charities need to shout louder too. I mean, I just happened to be walking across our village hall and playing fields this morning, and I know it's only a small part of the community, but or it's a big part of the community, but small in the scheme of things. But you know, nowhere does it say it's a charity, and I suspect of the 600 houses in the village, 90% of them think it's looked after by the local authority, and it's not a charity itself. So I think there is a massive opportunity of one, getting government to understand, but also for charities. Dan, I just you know, in the last sort of crisis, the financial crisis, grant income, and I'm talking about non-government income, responded first, but then we saw a drop of 9% from trust, you know, from trust with where their assets fell. What do you think that this means in 2021, where emergency grants come to an end?
Yes, that's a really pertinent question. I was talking earlier about the response of grant-making trusts, and there has been a really tremendous response in an emergency capacity, and also a shift in the attitude of funders to provide much more unrestricted grants for use where most needed. And funders have been collaborating a lot together. Examples like the London Funders Network, where a great many funders that are based in London or operated in the London area work together to provide targeted and effective support for the charity sector. So the response of trusts has been tremendous to date, but the economic shock of COVID, which we're starting to see the impact of, and will continue to see, and particularly into 2021, along with the fact that some of them have been spending some of next year's money this year in order to prop up the sector. That will put a strain on their 2021 grant making, and that was the case in 2008, when there was a sort of 18-month lag until grants started to drop, and we will probably see something like that probably towards the end of 2021 as well. So I think for that, it's imperative for charities to work hard at nurturing their relationships with grant-making trusts. They need to be able to recognise and really demonstrate the impact that they create. And I think that's something that's come up already in the conversations. So charities need to be you know, at the top of their game and really talking about the difference that they make, and the reason that they are an important and essential part of society. And then there also needs to be some recognition that there will be competition for that funding. There has been competition for emergency funding. There will be even more competition for what may be reduced or diminished funds towards the end of next year. And charities will need to have contingencies to be able to deal with that as well.
And Catherine, as a trustee of a grant maker, what's your experience in with this been?
Yeah, I mean, as a grant maker, we significantly increased the frequency of our meetings. So rather than 3 or 4 times a year, we were meeting every month. We were very much looking for applications from charities with a connection, normally physically, to our different offices around the country, so that we're trying to support those local communities. And I suppose giving out more grants in terms of number, but maybe smaller amounts, so that we could give that immediate funding that charities needed to get them over a particular hump in their financial planning, to try and make sure that their services can continue through lockdown. And for some charities, it was the more essential services, so whether it's a women's refuge, whether it's food banks, whether it's trying to provide educational facilities for children who are being homeschooled, those sorts of issues that we got much more involved with, whereas previously maybe we would look at bigger projects with a longer time span and we might provide some of the funding for it. We'd very much move to, let's look for immediate results in terms of the funding that we were giving out. And
had you increased the amount of money you were spending, or which means you're going to be spending less next year, or are you just spending the same amount and carry on doing it next year?
We had different amounts allocated, and we have made sure that we've spent all of that. And then quite how much we'll have next year, I don't know until we see how the firm does this year, but hopefully at least the same amount as this year. And I suppose for us, we're looking to say, how can we make that money go as far as possible, that we're, you know, really using that to its maximum effect.
Yeah, Anita, sorry.
I think I also sit on a grant making charity, Saintbury Trust, and we have decided to be very, very flexible. First of all, we've said no new applicants, so we're staying true to our core base. So we want to support those that we've already supported in the past. Yes, we've lost our portfolios as plummeted, and yet so we're going to have fewer amounts of money to give. But we've also taken a very pragmatic view. If organisations write to us and say, you gave us money for this, restricted, we're saying, yes, we'll unrestrict that, use it, because we want those organisations to survive and be there at the end of this whole process. So I think grant giving charities have now been quite good in the way they've approached this, but I think the tension still between restricted and unrestricted funds is there for the charities, and they need to deal with that.
Yeah, I have to say, as a trustee of RL Glasspool, we had been, this partnership and collaboration had been working for some time. That has actually accelerated as a result of the pandemic. So what our strategic plan that we'd set out, so that we were really looking at seeing how we can make a greater impact and use, you know, our ability to be able to give out small amounts of money to individuals and help other organisations do that in a way. Sorry, Robin, you had something to say.
Just a very quick observation. We're seeing a couple of innovations on the part of a number of grant makers we have worked with and actually advised. A few of them are actually becoming very interested in providing grants which are effectively seed funding for other income generation activities. A multiplier effect on their grant.
Yeah. I just want to move on to another area of fundraising. Dan, legacy income stands at about 3.4 billion per annum. How should charities approach this income stream in the pandemic? And then the second part of the question is what about the post-pandemic?
So legacy income is and remains a very important income stream for many charities. And yeah, what's happening in the pandemic is interesting. That there's a branch of behavioural psychology called terror management theory, which is a bit of an awful name, but it basically it looks at how people behave when they are more aware of their own mortality. I guess their mortality salience increases, and there are two ways that people behave. They either behave like ostriches, more in denial about what's happening around them, or like owls, wisely planning for the future and the impact that their lives and resources will have on those who are yet to come. And so, actually, in some ways, the pandemic creates sort of a heightened level of mortality salience, and an environment where perhaps it's easier for charities to talk about legacy fundraising in a way that they haven't been before. Whilst there will be many people who are ostriches and who won't respond to a message, there may be more who show themselves as owls and who will want to think about what will happen to their estate, their resources, should the worst happen. So actually charities can help people, and they can provide opportunities for people to think about how their resources can actually be used to help charities prosper, but also to help benefit those charity beneficiaries prosper into the future as well, which would be the sort of legacy, the sort of in perpetuity gift that individuals who want to leave. I think moving forwards, post-pandemic, there certainly is a reality that demographics just show us that the number of wills will increase between now and 2030. Just the shape of the population, and there's also been an increase in the sort of an ongoing, slow but steady increase in the proportion of legacies that are included in wills. So the number of wills will increase, the number of legacies in wills will also increase. So both those factors going up will mean that the legacy market, the legacy total income will also increase even though there's likely to be a bit of a drop in the average legacy value this year and probably into next year, due to recession, due to reduced house prices, due to reduced value of equities. So I think moving forward, charities, they need to be very sensitive, but you always need to be sensitive when you're talking about legacy fundraising. They need to keep trustees on side to make sure that the trustees are comfortable and aware of the sorts of legacy fundraising that they can and should be doing. But charities definitely should keep talking about legacy giving, the impact that legacies can make, and that leaving a legacy to a charity is a very good thing to do.
Yeah, Robin.
Where we're seeing a direct impact of COVID in donor relations is precisely because, as I said earlier, donors are waking up to the importance of resilience and sustainability for charities, and where the case for legacy giving has included building endowments, building reserves. That's where we have found that the legators are particularly receptive. It's not just building resilience to make sure that the charities they care about never find themselves in this position again. There's a bit of self-interest here as well. By knowing that this organization is going to endow my legacy, don't mean to be glib about it, but I know I'm not going to die on a Monday and everything I've worked my whole life for is gone by Thursday to pay off last year's deficit. I'm making a real permanent difference here.
Yeah.
I just, could I ask Robin? Robin, do you think we've been a bit shy because legacies imply death somewhere along the line? That as a sector, we've been a bit sort of coy in not tackling that very English thing, you know, you don't talk about death. And maybe we need to have those conversations, obviously in a sensitive way. Some of the charities hold back because they don't know how to, or they don't have the tools to have that conversation.
Up until recently, Anita, the average bequest to charity in the UK was slightly over £50,000. Now, of course, that ranges from very modest pecuniary bequest to somebody leaving their whole estate. Be that as it may, you can assume that your declared legators, those people who have told you that this is what they intend to do, are in fact major donors and should be treated like major donors during their lifetime, before the will matures, as I like to say. So we are finding that this case for permanence, this case for a legacy creating a legacy, i.e. being endowed, is something that donors are welcoming. And then when you put it in a different way, if the donor is getting benefits in their lifetime for a gift that is deferred, it further cements that relationship. So I think there are ways of approaching this which appeal to both the altruism of the donor and also the donor's wish to be a part of the organization until they are able to make the gift that they wish to.
But isn't one of the biggest challenges, and I know it as with a charity where we solely rely on fundraising, is that actually most of the legacies we get, we actually are not aware of them before we're told by the law. And I don't know how you change that or whether you should change it.
It's a huge risk. It probably happens because whilst many charities are doing legacy marketing, they aren't doing what I would consider legacy fundraising, which is actually sitting down with their donors and having that discussion. You don't know how to put your proposition forward if you have absolutely no idea who these people are and why they're supporting you and what the drivers are. You're also at risk of unhelpful terms and conditions attached to will. We worked with one educational institution that was sitting on a 7-figure permanently endowed bequest. They couldn't touch the principal and they couldn't touch the earnings of the principal except by the donor's instructions on research to prove that Marlowe wrote all of Shakespeare's works.
Yeah. Dan, is that your experience? And what advice would you give to trustees to change that?
So I think Robin's right that it is the importance of talking to people, and conversations about legacies are the key indicators to how likely you are to receive legacies and how your legacy income is likely to go up. So encouraging people to have conversations about legacies, and recording the number of those conversations that happen, and understanding that kind of dynamic is critical to make legacy fundraising program successful. And marketing comes into it, and there's a drip in terms of always having something about legacies or gifts in wills in your materials on your website, etc. But it's empowering trustees, volunteers, anybody associated with the charity to feel comfortable talking about leaving a gift in your will, and the value that brings to the charity, and then keeping a log of getting people to say when those conversations have happened, and nurturing those conversations along. It's not leaving a legacy isn't as easy as writing a check or going onto a website and making a donation. It's a process, and it's important to recognize that process and to take people on that journey, and to do it in a slow and methodical way, but to do it in a as you do with major donor fundraising. You don't expect a major gift to arrive as soon as you meet a wealthy person. It's a process that you go through, and trustees need to be aware of that and to encourage that to happen.
I think this goes back to Anita's Robin. Sorry, this goes back to Anita's original point about whether the sector has been not as good at maintaining the existing relationships. I want to. I'm conscious of time, so I just want to move on to another area around the corporate sector. Robin, have you seen? I mean, obviously we've got the pandemic hitting businesses. We've got the concerns over what's happening with Brexit. What's happening with the relationship with the corporate sector, and do you think that will recover? How do you think that might change post-pandemic?
Of course, I think it's important to stress right at the outset that whatever is going to happen is likely to vary wildly across different parts of the sector. The arts, for example, may well stay reasonably robust because many companies see their investment in an arts organization as a marketing exercise, not a CSR donation. In fact, in many instances, they're even sourced from different budgets, a more substantial marketing budget versus a fairly modest CSR budget. I'll let Anita comment on that more. But in general terms, Charles, I think we would expect to see CSR programs take a hit as frankly companies feel the need to hold on to cash because of COVID, Brexit, all of the uncertainty around this. We certainly saw this during and after the financial crisis. In a counterintuitive way, there is some good news. Corporate giving to charity has never been a particularly substantial part of the overall funds contributed to charity and the overall fundraising mix. Research shows consistently, and these are almost global figures, but certainly applies to the UK, it hangs around 5% of the overall funds contributed to charity. So an erosion of that isn't going to have a huge impact on the sector as a whole. However, it's going to hit hard those organizations who invested in it heavily, perhaps even disproportionately, and perhaps at the expense of more significant markets like individuals giving, which represents over 60% of all the funds contributed to charity.
And Anita, what's your experience been? I mean, obviously being a valuable local sort of asset, I would assume your engagement with local companies is going to be much stronger.
Yes, I mean, I think when you're based in your local economy, it is stronger. But we mustn't forget that with corporates, there is always an exchange. You're giving something and you're getting something in return. At the moment, we're not in a position to give because our venues are closed, and so whether it's marketing or whether it's to bring guests for a concert, etc. So we've got our hands tied behind our backs for a while until we can start opening our venues. And there's another issue that government needs to grapple. But and corporates and individuals are a challenge, I think, particularly for performing venues. I mean, yesterday there were figures out that is it 62% of individual givers haven't given to performing arts in the last couple of months. So you can see the challenges there. So I think the sooner we can get our charities working so that we can have that relationship where we are giving and taking, the better. But having said that, there are enough corporates out there who understand the value of the charitable sector, and I'll particularly talk about arts and culture here, because as I said earlier on, you know, we're not going to get our centres of our towns and cities alive until we get some of our charities working. So they do see that. And I had a really heartwarming conversation last week. Solihull College have been sponsoring us partly with our new capital, and they were going to get something in return, you know, bring their students in and etc. etc. Well, we can't offer that at the moment, but it was lovely for the principal to pick up the phone and say, I know you're going through a tough time, so we will stretch our sponsorship at the other end, but we'll give you some money up front because we know you need to get your capital done. So there is that goodwill there, and I think we need to sometimes just sing and shout about that because it is there.
So, I mean, in essence, people need to be thinking of this as a transaction, that there is, you know, you're receiving something and they're also receiving something in return, whatever that may be. Catherine, one of the biggest challenges is the public expect charities to be impoverished, living hand to mouth, criticize them if they sit on too much cash. Do you think, how do you think we can change the mindset? You know, how do we get people to see the benefit of investing rather than just giving, if that makes sense? And how do we get across that actually investing in strong, financially strong organizations is a better give than it is in ones that are living hand to mouth that may not be in a year or so's time because they can't continue that funding?
I think it's a really interesting point and has come out much more, I think, during this pandemic. And I think it picks up on the points that Anita, Dan and Robin were all making. And I think previously charities could be a bit grabby, could be a bit, you should give to us because we are a charity. And that was it. There was no explanation. There was no dialogue, communication, any sort of relationship there. It was just an immediate, we want, give it to us and then leave us alone. And I think during the pandemic, many people have grown to appreciate just how crucial charities are to society and to the services that they have perhaps taken for granted. And I think now maybe there's much more of an appetite to make sure that charities are fully funded rather than just funded enough. So, you know, if you're going to support a charity, well, it's not good enough to only give it enough to get to the end of this month. And if you want that charity to continue, then you need to look at, do you become a regular donor? Could you support it in a different way? But I think all of that requires much more careful communication by charities to say, well, why should you give to us? And I think it should be, why should you give to us compared to anybody else that you could choose to give to? And I think sometimes with charities, it can be this way with corporates, but also with perhaps high net worth individuals. It's almost that guilt approach of saying you should feel bad for working for a corporate organization, and the way that you can feel better is to give us a donation. Well, that doesn't really work for me. I don't think it works for many people. So I think for charities to try and better understand what truly motivates people to support them, and then tap into that and continue that ongoing relationship and dialogue to ensure that the support continues.
So don't make people feel guilty, make them feel good about it. Dan, what's your view on this?
I'd agree with Catherine that it is in many ways about how charities communicate, and I'm often surprised or less surprised as time goes by, but often observe when I go to different clients that they've not been particularly effective in really explaining their business model and the gap that they have between the resources that they have at the moment and the resources that they need in order to achieve the impact that they want to make. And so charities sometimes they're not very good at actually demonstrating that they have a fundraising need in the first place, and they're less good at asking or making the case for why people should give to fill that gap, because they haven't really talked about the gap. They've talked about all the good things that they do and all the ways that they change society, but they haven't talked about the missing part in terms of why and how they need funding for that. And I think that goes across the board in all sorts of charities are probably guilty of that. And if charities were able to communicate better, to communicate their business model better to the public, educate the public in some ways as to the fact, yes, they can make a difference, but their business model is such that they need some certain amount of money to come in order to make that happen, and each and every year, then people will be more willing to donate. They'll be more willing to engage. Not everybody, but enough, and that would certainly help charities to get across a better message about investment rather than just give us some cash now because we're a good organisation.
Yeah, Robin.
It's an opportunity to draw a couple of strands together. I take your point. There may be that general perception that the general public believes that charities somehow are virtuous if they're living hand to mouth. That there's a fundamental sea change in that right now. And as a trustee, as a fundraiser, I'm far more interested in what are the perceptions of my stakeholders rather than the general public. While at one time it perhaps was seen as an inhibitor if a donor looked at too healthy a balance sheet for a charity, now actually that healthy balance sheet is seen as essential and investment worthy because it ensures resilience, and it means that the charity that I care about and the work that they do are never going to have to go through this again. This is a good time to be having that conversation. Tying it back to one point of legacies as well, we're running a campaign at the moment to help a grant maker treble its income over the next 5 years. But every donor, when we're discussing the possibility of making a pledge, we are asking them to consider making a legacy to permanently endow the charity at the same time. It's not as difficult as one would think.
But these are people who already have a relationship with the charity.
In some instances, yes. In some instances, it's an indirect relationship. I don't want to bog the discussion down, but every discussion that we are having with donors, with potential donors, those donors are known and within the networks of existing donors. And we're finding that existing donors not only are committed and not only want to keep giving and not only want to upgrade their investment at a time of crisis like this, they're prepared to open doors and bring in new donors for you.
Brilliant, thank you. So I've got sort of one final question I want to ask all four of you. So if you were to pick the greatest opportunity for the sector post-pandemic, what would that be? I don't know, Anita, would you like to start?
Oh, wow. I don't think there is one. I think legacy.
Well, you give more than one if you want.
We talked about legacy, so that's an obvious one. But I also think this is an opportunity for the sector to reset itself and to think about recovery as a long-term plan, not for next year, and to try and get others around us, particularly givers and donors, to think about us in that light and not as a one-night wonder, but that we're here for 3 years, 5 years. So it's reset, recover for us as trustees and individuals, and then explore those opportunities, be bold, with legacies, and picking up those conversations with individuals who are probably thinking we've been ignoring them during the pandemic. And corporates, don't forget, the corporates still want to recover. And if we can help support that, then I think we're in a strong position.
Brilliant. Dan, what about you?
I want to pick up on something that was mentioned in I think in the last session that you had with Karen Bradshaw, where she talked about digital and how there's clearly been a shake-up in charities' use of digital technologies and perhaps a catch-up with other sectors, or move towards catching up. And I think that's true in fundraising as well, that there are opportunities. There are many yet to be realised, but opportunities both in using digital communications to ask for funds, but also using digital technology to manage how your fundraising operates and your fundraising team operates, where they operate from, how they communicate with each other, how they share information. I think a number of charities have discovered perhaps some freedoms that digital has provided to them. Freed them from the office necessarily, freed them from some of the constraints that they had previously, and those are many things to be leapt on. There are some downsides as well, and face-to-face is generally better than digital in terms of quality of content, of quality of interaction. But the digital does offer opportunities to reach many more people, or to engage in different ways with individuals, and to enable more people and more individuals to work and support your charity from a volunteering or from a fundraising perspective. So I think there are many things there that can be embraced by charities whilst recognising some of the risks and not doing it completely blind.
Excellent. And Catherine?
I think probably around communication. I think similar to Anita saying, I think that the sector could reset at this point, and I think some of that could be around explaining to government, explaining to the general public, explaining to their supporters exactly how your charity works, how is it funded, what crucial services does it provide, what would happen if you were not here anymore. I think much more around that messaging piece and clear communication coming from charities. I think an ongoing dialogue will be worth so much more than I think the sort of grab and retreat that I mentioned previously. So I think if charities embrace, there is an interest at the moment in charities and how they work and what they do. So, I think charities should be trying to grab that and make sure that they are exploiting this interest to make sure that others are better educated and better informed about what their charity does.
And finally, Robin.
Perhaps in a near-term perspective and something very practical, I think charities have the opportunity to actually build COVID recovery into their proposition. Here's what we have been doing. Here's how we spend your investment. Here are the outcomes. All of this is going to magnify now. We need your investment even more as we prepare to come out of this. So that's one thing. Resetting seems to be the word of the day here. I would say an opportunity to reset our relations with our existing donors, because frankly, finding new donors is not going to be easy for a while to come, but it is worth it. We've been monitoring good donor communications programs with our clients over the last few years, and there are actually some stunning emerging results. We've been recommending that for every 6 communications with their donors, only 1 involves an ask, and yet of those 6 communications, 2 to 3 instances results in a gift, even if you've only asked once. Lastly, point I've made a couple of times, donors have woken up to the importance of resilience here. They see that the charities they support may be able to weather the storm, but what about the next one? So now is an opportunity, and there's never been an opportunity to talk to your donors about how to build resilience, and that means money, to build resilience into your cause now, for the next time the unthinkable becomes the real.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. Well, I think this is the time to sort of sum up, and actually quite difficult with all the information we have, but I suppose the messages that I'm taking away is look after your existing community and engage with them. And it shouldn't always be just asking for money. It's more than that. I think Catherine's made a very good point around the messaging and being clear about your communication, both to government and also to the general public and to your to those who are within your ecosystem, if I can call it that. And then finally is looking to technology as a way of enhancing what you're doing, but see it as a tool, not as the Holy Grail. Anyway, I think that's absolutely fantastic. Thank you to my 4 panelists, Anita Bala, Robin Thomas, Catherine Ross-Jomji, and Dan Fletcher. And we will be holding the next webinar on the 29th of October, and we're going to be looking at the review of the Governance Code. But thank you, and I think that's a really fantastic food for thought.